The Why Didn't You Test That podcast want to improve your software. Join Hugh, Rich and their guests. They share experiences and insights on the many sides of better software delivery.
Hello, good people. Welcome back. We have an amazing guest today, one of my good friends, Chris Rowett. We worked together, we bumped into each other at when we worked for CA, when we got bought, and we've spent countless hours in sitting at the back of trade shows, talking complete nonsense about where the world is going wrong, and occasionally we do drift into IT and trying to deliver quality across large enterprises. I suppose that could be the rough theme. Chris is having a little bit of a break from work at the moment, which is, I think, well deserved. Prior to that, he was working for Sea Lights. I'm not sure if you guys have had a look at that. Very good company. Have a look at them. And Chris was head of customer success, which I'm sure was just, how was it, Chris? Was everything successful? Did it all work?
Of course, yeah, probably my dream job. Customer success is beautiful because you actually get to work with the customers and make them successful. The clue's in the title. So it's not enough to have a good story. You need to show value, you need to show benefits, and you get very close to your customers, walking with them on those journeys. So and importantly, you learn a lot. So it was a super good time for me. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Good. I suppose the sort of the common theme today is juggernauts. Let's just pick that up as the theme, juggernauts. I guess so. Just Chris and myself, we were kind of tasked with being the sort of main evangelical strategists that were floating around the world with a lot of big CA customers. I'm very much an arm waver, and I charge off down, and hope that everyone follows me. It's served me really reasonably well, both as in a business and also in my social life, although I do quite end up often in a pub on my own, having left everyone behind because they didn't want to go to the pub that I wanted to go to. So occasionally you've got to turn around and check that people are actually following you. Chris seemed to be a bit more methodical than me in terms of sort of laying out the vision and the steps. So I guess Chris and I were the ones that were trying to change by trying to show a vision, trying to prove to people that it can be done and the effects can be quite dramatic. And we have different approaches in terms of, how you go about that. And then I suppose Rich, sitting between the two of us in the middle at the moment on my screen, was the guy that actually had to do it in the real world as a customer, I suppose. So let's start with you, Chris. So let's just talk about the general themes about trying to go into a large company and, actually persuade someone to do something. Let's just start with that, which is a fairly broad sort of opening softball. Yes, exactly.
It is about getting some attention, and I'm sure every large organisation, they've got thousands of hopefuls knocking on their door every day. What you want is an imperative for change that comes from the market. Because when you get that, they're already worried about it. If you've already got senior C-level people concerned about how they're going to survive in the new digital markets, how they're going to cope with e-payments, how they're going to cope with the next generation of millennials and how they want to consume their services, you're already in a good place because they're looking for problems and it's new. So what they're looking for is people who've helped other similar size juggernauts go on that very painful and very complicated journey, and that's where I guess that you and I came in, Hugh, because we had the privilege of working with dozens of such large scale organisations as they tried to cut their teeth and learn on that journey. I guess for me, two of the important things were understanding who cares. What is their business goal? What's the big elephant in the room in their business that's causing them to need to change? Because no one wants to change. Change is painful. It disrupts things. It changes roles. It makes people concerned. So you're not going to change unless there's a really good and compelling reason. So the first thing was, what is that in your business, in your industry? Why are you having to change? Why are you having to talk to other people, advisors, figure out how you need to adjust what you take to business? And secondly, who will drive that, and how will you pay for it? Because nothing happens without without some budget and somebody actually driving driving these programs. So when it was digital was new and everything was APIs and everything was going mobile, it was a relatively easy target to at least where do we start in a large organization, right? You knew which teams you needed to go and talk to, and you could probably get a fairly senior conversation because someone, it was strategic to the organization to survive.
So Rich, you want to just chime in on that, because you actually did this, didn't you?
Yeah, I guess I'm going to pick up on a lot of the same points in terms of the imperative to change, right? And I think, sometimes I think there's a conflicting problems, right? In the C-level want to change, and I'm going to concentrate on the need to change test here, right? Obviously, there's an imperative, and digital transformation, DevOps, Agile, all of these organizations are driven from the top down in the need to do these things. I think one of the big challenges we always saw was around, what does transformation in test mean at that level? It means automation and making it cheaper, right? Which is fine, but how you actually get there, I think, is part of the challenge, right? And I think a lot of organizations have grown over time. There's a lot of complexity involved. Automation on its own, execution of automation on its own isn't necessarily the answer that they're going to get. And I think we always quote around kind of within the industry, 15 to 20% of all tests that are executed are automated, right? And bearing in mind, we've been spending the last 10, 15 years trying to automate everything. That's absolutely terrible, right? And for me, that's where we're missing something. And part of that is the messaging.
Yeah, but they're also testing the same thing. If you look at those tests, the coverage is tiny.
Absolutely. And this is where I think, there is a fundamental misunderstanding between what does transformation mean at that level, what does it mean in terms of test, and that's why I mean, it's not just execution, it's the whole fundamentals around understanding coverage, understand what it means to have stability, repeatability. Actually, that's where you can go and exploit and do true transformation, right? I've totally lost in terms of what the original question was.
You're the youngest one here, by the way.
I know. I've just been on holiday. I've just been on holiday, so that's my excuse. So we had to come in and almost change the narrative at that top level to say, actually, we need to do some more substantial things rather than let's just automate tests. Let's engage in a wider quality conversation. Let's truly understand what our underlying problems are, and back to the kind of the juggernaut kind of we knew we had to create momentum, right? In terms of we were never going to do a big bang, let's change everything all at once. It was actually prove a point in a certain area, start small, think big, kind of, I think is the saying, and create a proof point. Then go out and tell the world, right? Start evangelizing with a new organization to create that momentum, right? And then this is where you get into the diffusion innovation curve, by which you're always going to have some innovators within the organization. You're always going to have some laggards, right, that are quite cynical around that change. And, I think big bang transformation won't work because those cynics have a loud voice and therefore they will kill any innovation. Actually creating those innovative pockets, start evangelizing in that, you get the momentum, right? And eventually you get over that diffusion of innovation, crossing the chasm, I think is the saying. 16% of the organization doing it. Once you've got over that, you've actually got a movement which is actually, you're not, driving it out from an individual evangelizing these things. Actually, the organization is moving towards that place. And, this is where we found that there was a shift between that central focus into actually federating out a capability. And I don't think that's unique to the way we did it. I think that's kind of true of all organizations that are doing successful transformation.
I think that's actually ridiculously idealistic from what I've seen. I mean, based on the sort of the last 2 weeks worth of conversations, I mean, the organizations are so behind, and there seems to be extremely little appetite. You might have one or two. I mean, they've almost become sort of Don Quixote figures who are actually willing to give it a shot. They've generally made their way up in the organization because they're competent and they're bright and they're imaginative and they've solved problems. But as soon as they try and do anything, I mean, we're talking to a Dutch company. 3 years ago, I said, look, what you're doing is going to completely, which was masking. I was basically saying it's a complete waste of time. You're going to find it really problematic. It's going to cause you all sorts of problems. Sure enough, 3 years later, it's, oh, we haven't really got any benefit. In fact, it's made it way more complicated and nothing works anymore. Now they want to, and finally now, 3 years later, we say, well, what you really need is a proper test data strategy where you're actually, understanding the data that's hopping between one system and another, beefing it up, and being able to inject it and also virtualize it, and bingo, you've got plugs, and you can test plugs much more efficiently than testing, an entire funfair. So and this just happens, I'm 65 now. I mean, for God's sake. I mean, back in the 80s, we used to be able to do this turn on a sixpence. I used to just go out and kick on the CEO's door of S&P and just say, look, give me 50 grand. I'm going to hire 2 consultants. And he'd say, you sure? I'll give it a go, and we were able to do that. I mean, the fragmentation, I think we should maybe just talk about the fragmentation of the organizations now, because not only have we been caught up with the fragmentation of technologies, in that technology is way, 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 way harder now. I mean, the hibernates, all the various different layers, and now the security teams have managed to get involved, which means it's almost impossible to do anything because it might actually be a security leak. But in fact, the best system they would ever have would just be a big button saying no, and that just completely gets in the way of being able to do anything quickly. Again, we were talking to a company down in the West Country. Their code is absolutely fantastic. But it takes them 6 months to get it. They can code something in a week. They'll have unit tested it themselves because they're pretty good developers, and they've sort of built that into their component testing and all that kind of stuff. It takes them 6 months to get that into production.
So it's a really good segue into kind of organizational design, because in that example you quoted here, and I see that all the time. Is that meeting the business goals? Right, because you've got a very frustrated testing team, you've got very frustrated squads, developers, and so on. And they've done their job. They've built the pipeline, it's automated, etc. And then we go through phase after phase of sign off and regulation and security and all those sorts of things as it slowly and inexorably walks its way down to production, where we can actually get some actual value from all the code that we've generated. So if you were to speak to the business in those organizations, and maybe you have, maybe you haven't, what would they say about the development
deeply
process?
Frustrated.
Yeah, deeply frustrated. It's taking way too long. What are IT doing? They're in our way. We're not able to compete. And a decade ago, when it was innovate or die in emerging digital markets, they create brand new incubator teams and with their own kind of IT ops and everything end to end, just so they could get a march in various markets. And I worked with large financial services companies who'd literally spin up a brand new subsidiary to do their digital banking because the existing infrastructure and organization wasn't capable. It would get there over time. And so, as Rich said, quite often you'll get they'll build a lighthouse project, or they built a lighthouse subsidiary where they could cut their teeth on agile, on full automation, on all these things, so that they could deliver change at speed. And then that was driven, where did it come from? They needed to be first to market in that digital world, or they that was a business that was going to evade them. So I see that time and time again now across industry, and in some cases it got briefly worse, and hopefully only briefly worse. When we went through the delights of lockdown and all these things, suddenly then it's number one priority is no longer business agility, it's cost cutting. Right, so now the budgets you need to continue to invest to get those changes, and you couldn't make any change. And we've worked with organisations over the last 2-3 years whose businesses, business people are tearing what little hair they have left, and I know how that feels, because they're stuck. Thanks, because they're stuck. But you can't get consultant one in for the first hour. You can't bring in an automation or a test data tool or whatever unless you can show the the CFO that there is a hard dollar payback within 12 months. Now, and so we're looking at that problem in the microscope of that little phase of the pipeline. Who's looking end to end at the business service that we're providing and the market we're providing it to? Because that's the justification. That's all the justification you need. Because what's your actual business problem? Is it time to market? You can't bring capabilities as fast as your competitors. Is it reputational damage because your product's low quality and your customers hate you and they're going on social media and telling the truth? Shocking. Are you in danger of regulatory fines because you're not being compliant quickly enough? So what's the actual cost of quality? Because it's rarely the cost of the team that's trying to improve it or automate it. It's more it's more the impact on that end-to-end thing. And I say that for me got markedly worse over austerity, and we'll have to see how that bounces back. But there's got to be a friction point at some stage that helps us get better attention, so we do have alignment between what the business actually needs and the mechanisms we have to put in IT to enable that.
I mean, I would say, I think right at the very beginning when we started talking about this, I talked about a German company, Alta Leipziger, which I think has gone away now. And I mean, they had a very, very small IT team, but they spent about 10 to 15% of their time building tools to support the development process, and that was considered part of the job. So they basically built their own DevOps framework. They'd even gone into requirements, and they had some language parsing to make sure that the requirements were, syntactically correct. They had glossaries and things like that, which programmers aren't really kind of thought of doing that kind of stuff. So first of all, you need to commit to having, if you've got a programmer in there, there's no point in giving them, oh right, we're going to, the amount of people said, oh, we used open source, great. How much money do you save with open source? Probably like, threepence halfpenny compared to the cost of, 300 programmers sitting there frantically trying to code at the lowest level. So there's that. The other one that manages, I'm going to give a hard time now in IT because I don't think they do a very good job, is refactoring. They don't spend enough time refactoring. I mean, as again I mentioned in a previous podcast, I had a complete freak out about a year ago and decided we needed to refactor our own product, because we couldn't find a way from one place to the other, which was kind of mad because that's kind of what we do for other companies. So we then basically kind of put in in effect, a kind of equivalent to a graph database, so we can now trace anything, and we can then spider out from our product to other products, from Jira to ALM to Azure, and find our way across that. But that took a significant amount of refactoring. But now immediately, I mean, you really do slow down for about 3 months, but then you accelerate away very, very quickly. It's a bit like sailing. You kind of go off into the wind for a bit, and then suddenly you're on a much better tack and off you go. And managers really don't seem to get that refactoring. And the third one is technical debt. I mean, it's just the complete lack of understanding of the technical debt that you managed to build up. I mean, it should just be like, you should just have maybe sort of a weight on your door or something like that, which turns from the amount of technical debt turns into a sort of 70 kilo block that you have to try and open your door in the terms of the stagnation that causes. So you've got all this great vision stuff, but if you don't understand the data in your systems, and it is the data, it's not the processes, because all you really care about is connecting to that data to be able to extract data from it, transform it, do whatever it is. If you don't have that understanding of the technical debt and the ability to continually just pay off so that it's reused across the organization, then you're stuffed. You're absolutely stuffed. And that 70 kilo weight in front of your door is going to become an 80 kilo day and a 90 kilo day. And I think those are the kind of three most fundamental things. Bigger budget for IT on tools, refactoring regularly, and include that and tell the business that we are refactoring for 3 sprints. So, and warn them and then do it. And then the other one is just this ability to pay off technical debt and get it into people's heads that we can't really do your enhancement until we've actually spent a couple of sprints actually going and scanning the data and understanding it, using there's plenty of tools around which can track the data flows, but if you don't understand what the data is flowing backwards and forwards, then you just chuck it over a bunch of programmers who've, brilliant programmer, but they're just looking at this data going, well, it's a zero, it's a null. What does that mean?
So certainly one of the things I've seen, and Chris alluded to earlier on, is where organisations have got a degree of complexity and they are slow to change. I think there is, or certainly there was and continues to be a growing change in creating these kind of breakaway organisations in the name of organizations acting like startups, right? Which is just let's create a breakaway organization, let's spin this thing up and It's almost a facade of the agility you get from operating as a greenfield operation, right? But I think one of the challenges is it tactical? All right, because sooner or later, what are you going to do with that greenfield organization? Are you going to keep it greenfield, or at some point has it got to bolt into the larger organization, right? And this is back to your point around, refactoring at the organizational level, right? To understand how that will come back in. How do you refactor that? And actually, if you're going to operate like that, because that might be the right thing to do in the short term, right, to get that business outcome, but what technical debt are you going to accrue by operating this two organizational kind of dynamic, right? Because you're going to do it, right? And I think that's one of the big problems that I see a lot of organizations almost seeing the agility in the short term you get, but not really understanding the long term pain or decision you need to make sure that doesn't become a bigger problem in the future.
Yeah, and I think a big piece of this needs to be better, almost education between the business owners and IT, because all the things we're really discussing are related to a lack of understanding of what's involved to push change, quality change through pipelines, and and there's lots of strategies, and you've alluded to some. We'll talk more probably later around mechanisms to transform and to be able to get those, and lots of evangelism and shouting about things. But you're constantly selling. But what you're selling is you're saying, oh, we, all that stuff you didn't understand, and we've been complaining about for ages, and you hate, because it's just delay as far as you're concerned. Here's what you can expect. Here's the outcomes from it. But it's not a one shot, because you need two things. You need to buy into it, because this is where eventually we're all going to go. So there's more pain coming, by the way, but hopefully I've tempted you with what you're going to get on the flip side of that. And the other piece is that you need to think about different ways that you're now going to measure the business and measure the teams, right? Because if you care about what's the cost of running tests, what's the cost of fixing tests, etc. None of those are looking at what's the cost of a failure with my key customer.
Yeah.
Because that's one possible actual impact of ineffective testing is you might save 10% because you've got to cut the testing budget again this year, but you might lose 20% of your revenues if you don't get this right, and that problem's only getting worse, because if your competitors are getting that right and you're not, it's a quick downward spiral. So understanding how you measure the teams and how you measure them, maybe not just against their own budgets, etc. And we've seen this a lot. You talked about you might get a company that maybe where you were, Rich, where the senior leaders buy into a transformation and they fund it, and at some level they fund the transformation. They talk about it in town halls. It's branded. Everybody knows you're on the program. And then the practitioner teams who've got the skills and the experience to actually make the right changes start doing that. They understand from day one it's a selling job, so they're going to evangelize every little win, every little step as they go through. But what about the layer in the middle? How are they measured? And are they still measured historically as they were, and their budgets and hours and time and all these sorts of things? Because that has to change as well. And if you don't do that, then you get this horrible clash in the middle where the edicts come down, make it so, and the practitioners are now fighting against a layer of management who, not their fault, haven't had their metrics changed.
Yeah.
So getting the right metrics. We had a great example recently where we were able to put more visibility into the whole testing process, but you've got one group testing, doing one of the phases of testing, another group doing development, and we were able to show all the gaps, all the things they weren't testing, all these things, and the team that got that information buried it. They didn't say, "Oh, thank you for showing us everything we've missed." They were like, A, we're going to look bad, and B, we haven't got the budget to fix all these holes, so we just won't tell anyone." Right?
I was talking to a guy last week. It's an extremely prestigious company, and you weren't allowed to say the word bug.
Huge cultural issue there, and why? Because someone up the chain is measured on escaping defects or bugs or whatever, and they won't get their bonus.
Yeah, they had to change the language. These guys were brought in to improve quality, and they're really good. I really respect them. They had to basically go away. They're still working on it, trying to come up with a new set of words where you're not allowed to use the word bug. And meanwhile, there's bugs right, left, and center. I mean, consumers have talked to anyone on the street, and they'll tell you a bug with this particular company. How can you get yourself where you are, a multi-billion-pound company, and you can't say the word bug? I mean, what kind of convoluted sort of 1984 double speak can we end up in a world like that?
Well, I agree. Well, I mean, if we're kind to them, they're a multi-billion-dollar company, so they've done something right. However, if they want to continue to be doing so well, but I think for me,
yeah, but the four people I spoke to have already switched.
Okay, well,
to a competitor.
For me, that comes back to there are people in that organisation who are measured in the wrong way.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why you can't use the nasty B word, the bug word, because it's the department or whatever. Someone's measured against that, and that's a failure of understanding. So a big part about that transformational journey is education. They need to understand that a bug is a first-class thing that you really need to care about, and it should be a word that people understand and have a a strategy and a process to efficiently remove.
I think for me the interesting point, going back to the kind of the security function, in that almost the refactoring of behaviors and the role of certain, the role of test even, right, in that, in the example there, and I think even in the security example, they're acting as gatekeepers, right? And I think you could get away with that in a waterfall model to a certain extent. With an agile, you're not a gatekeeper, right? You're an enabler, right? And those controls are there to enable faster flow, right? Even the bug, doesn't really matter. It's there to enable flow so you can remove the bug or get faster feedback, and that behavioral change, the refactoring, the baking in of those controls into the delivery process, that's really going to get you transformational change. Acting like a gatekeeper, you're just going to get friction, right? It's not going to work. And I think that's often missst.
Yeah, and I think another kind of adjacent example to that, we had a customer who. So let me say a statement first. Every organisation that I've worked with say they're agile now, and the reality is they're all on the journey. And some of them are extremely good and very well practiced, and it's quite, it's across most of the right areas it should be, that it's appropriate for, and others have got a team doing it. But we're all agile, so that's great, and at least they're testing it, and they're measuring the benefits that they hope to see. So I think having that. The fact they're going on that journey is important, and the fact that they realise that one of the things they have to do is measure everything they can, right? Because one of the big things that I think is still not fully understood in the business's idea, and you mentioned waterfall, that's history, but there's still a lot of it about, but there was also this development and operations. Right, so we do lots of change which you hate, and then we throw it over the wall, and now you're responsible for keeping the lights on. Well, all of that's now shifted way left, because in our agile teams, or our feature teams, we're end-to-end responsible for that business service. So we really, so you do have to measure everything. You have to measure the whole journey, and you have to use that data to make better business decisions.
Yeah.
Right, and there are roles in the agile, that you've got product manager and other things. So now, what's then disappointing is I go and you have a conversation with you, and they talk to you about all this stuff, and they're aligned, and you think, okay, we're in a good place. And then as you alluded a bit, Hugh, and then you hit like security and compliance and other teams. So you're super agile for a while, and then we get stuck behind all the real gatekeepers. Yeah. And the one for me, so I'm okay with the principle of those, because it's key, especially in security, especially as long as it's done efficiently and you've got things that you have to be compliant with. The one that's frustrating is when there's then business gatekeepers, and the business gatekeepers normally aren't gatekeepers at all. The door is wide open, and they're accelerating the highly polished thing that you think you've built, because they want it to market immediately. And what data are they using to understand how well tested this particular these user stories are, or these features are? And I think my favourite quote recently was, we were talking to an organisation, and I was saying, can I go and talk to, who's involved in the release management decision? Who does that? Because it's only automated up to a certain point, and then someone presses a button. And what's that process? And they said, oh yes, we have a meeting. And we've got, there's a business stakeholder, and we have the product manager and the lead architect, and they come together and they make that decision. And they said, we call it the confidence meeting. And I said, well, what do you mean the confidence meeting? Talk me through one of those, and how do you make that decision? Well, we kind of, and finger in the air, and it's how much did we change? But really, it comes down to, there's only one vote, and the vote's from the business person, and if they want that in, it's going in, right? And then we just have to be on alert in IT to tidy up quickly. So it's vaguely helpful, because we know we've got a problem coming. So everyone gets a pager, and we're ready to deal with the fallout. So again, it's back to education of that end-to-end process. You hope that the data of failure is enough to educate the business, but it depends at what level you're talking at.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's not that hard. I mean, if you think about it, okay, I've changed a line of code. Okay, you just categorize that code as, there's different levels. It's peripheral. We've changed the color on a screen. We've changed the way we do a drop down on one column, or we've changed the way that we do columns in a class across all of the systems. Suddenly the risk goes up on those. Because you've got different browsers, blah, 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 blah. You've got something that's sitting in an API. You've got something that's sitting in a security module. So you already know it's the testability of that change that is the most crucial part. It's not the change to the code. You could do 1,000 lines of code. It's sitting off to the side. It's just it's a business intelligence report. You know the guy. You've already warned him that it's going to be it might be a bit dodgy. Could he check it out for the first couple of months? Fine, and then we'll go with it. This idea about how complex a change is how testable it is. Again, I told this in a previous story. I told this to a guy on a golf course, and I didn't play golf with him for a year, and he said, oh, thanks for that tip. It completely changed our organization. I took it back, talked to IT about it, and they basically then said, every single time that we come forward with a request for a change to the system, he was a business owner, I've asked them to come back and say, how hard would it be to test? And that has now meant that we've now had a much smoother set of deliverables, because we thought it was a simple change, but actually it's such a fundamental change, it's enormous to test. That allowed us to put things in the correct sequence, and we've managed to churn things out in a much more smooth way. So this testability and the impact of change. So that's the first thing. The second one is basically where you and I live, Chris, which is basically providing tools to go and analyze that. So it's not finger in the air, it's subjective. And then, it's like this whole idea of AI. AI should be able to make these decisions for you, but it's based on crap data. Yeah, you might have your code scanners looking for code quality, but they're not plugged in anywhere. They're not, that information is fed up. So you've got a junior programmer that comes in, they put some code in, it fails all the things, the senior programmer just pushes it through. The other one is, who made the change? Have they been working on this system for a long time? Are they a new person? All of these are basically completely quantifiable, and if you track them, you can start moving away from the finger in the air kind of stuff. And getting on to the stuff that Sea Lights did, and we also do that at Curiosity, this idea of being able to say, if I change this code, show me the test cases that currently test that code. Do you have enough? Is it tested at all? When I run my tests, can I eliminate the other 1,000 automated tests and only work on the 32 of them? Do I need to go into modeling them and come up with 64? Create some better unit tests and push them forward. That ability to expand in terms of this little flowering explosion of testing and then just drop it back down to the basics doesn't really exist. Yet we've had this technology since Agile Designer kind of came into the marketplace with grid tools and then CA, this ability to create these specific sets of test cases. But the ability to join that up, that's a massive failure of IT. That's not business. They need to be able to tell the business the effect of this. And they should be able to do that. I mean, that's what they're techies. It's code. Write your own code, buy a product, join stuff up, and that really is going to feed the information back to the business so that they can then have the confidence, going back to your thing, to be able to say, yeah, I understand that risk now. And, have you increased the testing? Have you tested those core pieces of the security module? Have you done increased API testing? Do we need to increase the number of automated tests? Yes, we do. Well, why don't we delay it for a week, do that, and then we'll push out. All of those decisions can be done based on good data, and that's down to IT. That's not down to the business.
Yeah, 100%. And we got to a point with customers where they coined this phrase. You have the change advisory board, and the nirvana was the auto cab. Right, so I don't want people, guessing, or even if they're smart and they really understand, they know the system well, and this was a risky change because it's a core piece, or we've changed the payment module, so there's regulatory stuff to do. When you get down to the actual, the individual bits, as you said, who committed the change, what's their history, how well trained are they, what's their bug history, what's their hit rate look like, right? How many test cases are there, and are they meaningful, and how many of those tests are up to date, and how many failed recently, right? And then you get down into kind of the code instrumentation level that the C-Lights are doing, which is saying, well, based on actually running the test, how much of the code did you actually cover with the tests? And then with your stuff, how many data scenarios did you actually test? And is that enough to give you the confidence level you need to release this? So the tools are there and the data's there, but getting the people to understand the importance and why they need them in the process, because ultimately it gets you to the point where the go no go decision becomes simple, because the risk is scored for you.
So I just add one more on that one, because this one stuck in my mind actually on that, in that when coders are coding, and I do this a lot, is that you're actually in different stages of coding. You're kind of prototyping initially. You start off by creating almost wireframes and the basics of something, and that actually goes into production, but it is not, it might be ancillary, it might just be some additional, you might need to basically track data better in your system, so you're just putting the plumbing in. It doesn't matter if it goes wrong, it's just basic stuff, and you don't really need to do the full code analysis on that, because it is in that kind of prototype. Then it goes through a level of hardening, and by the time it's going to that, so that's one thing people say, oh, there was a lot of bugs with this programmer, but then you say, well, we use him as a prototype programmer. They're churning out the new glamorous screens, we're giving them as replacements, they already have the original screens, but there's loads of bugs in there, but we're moving quickly just to get something up, and it's more of a visualization thing. And I think people kind of miss the subtle differences between those programmers. And I mean, I remember one programmer was unfairly, castigated for the number of bugs, and they kept giving him stuff, and then the manager was like, no, he's the man, he does all the UI stuff, he chucks stuff up, he's the reason that we're so successful, but according to the metrics, he's a disaster. That factor as well has got to be kind of borne in mind, I think.
No, I couldn't agree more, and I think it's back to make sure you've got the right data, make sure people are educated, and yours is a great example. So we did have customers who literally were, some of them were gamifying teams against each other into which is a strategy. But others were just using it to understand and help people know where they needed to improve, where they had risk, and those sorts of things. But understanding how to interpret the data is very important. Otherwise, you get into scenarios like you described, which is which is understood. So I think it's the good news is the tools are there, the expertise is there, but there is work to do to actually put the right strategy together. To build the right pipeline, understand what you're measuring, understand what it means, understand how you'll use it, because the other side that you'll definitely get, and when I was a developer many years ago, if people were inspecting what I was doing, I was offended. Right, so in the bad old waterfall days, I'd write a bunch of code and then I'd check it in and I'm done. I'm an amazing coder, it's obviously brilliant. And then, waterfall process, 4 weeks later, some QA person comes back and says, there's bugs in you, criticizes me. How very dare you? Well, you just don't understand my genius. That's all it was. But if you make me the owner of the quality of that code, I'm approaching it very differently. And then I'm all in. Then give me the tools. I want to see. There's no one who isn't going to use a debugger, and they won't. And people shouldn't be afraid of unit tests. I'm now proud of my code. I don't want to ship stuff that fails somewhere, even if it's just in the next phase, because that reflects badly on me. So understanding what to measure and understanding how you use that data and how you actually want to share that data, if you've got that strategy right, then you're much closer to this ability for auto approval. within regulatory rules, of course. And because again, really what I want as a developer is I want to do the stuff I enjoy. And so all that boring, I want, let's automate it away, but give me the tools to understand when I need to pay attention, when I don't. And then, if you can through tools and automation make me more efficient and reduce the cost of quality and allow me to spend more time doing better automation and other things, then I'm also going to please the people who care about, the CFO and all the people who say, oh well, we've got, we need cost cutting, we need to take 10% out of your testing, your quality budget. Taking any money out of something that protects your business seems insane to me, but I'm not a CFO.
I mean, I'll just on that one come back to the programmers. Because I was battered around, came out of university with a computer science degree, mathematics, blah, 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 and there's just, and I got slapped around so hard by the senior programmer and stop writing code that's too clever, no one can maintain it, Hugh. This is the standard, stick to it. And then I moved to New York actually, and then, I ended up having 50 programmers working with me at the Philadelphia Board of Ed. And basically every single one of those churned out code that was deadly boring, easy to maintain, followed my 28 pieces of coding standards, and magically the system went in on time and under budget, and I mean it was down to pretty much that one programmer giving me a good kick in, I mean maybe Rich, you can have a final word on this, because you actually sort of I remember one of the things you told me in Nationwide is that everyone sort of seemed to come through your team. So if you're trying to change an organization, you do need people to, I'm not going to say join the Moonies, but have a sort of an eye to quality and starting them off, even if they're a programmer, in that quality team, and getting them into those methodologies and approaches, I think seem to pay dividends for Nationwide.
Yeah. So we always talked about incubation, which was, these small teams that we talked about at the start, right? And that to touch on the product manager point, I think without the right measures and incentives, people do the wrong things, right? And there is a danger that some teams become feature factories, and therefore they're just trying to hit the next date with the next feature, regardless of whatever technical debt they're accruing, right? And so part of what we were doing around actually, we were incubating, we were putting it into the mindsets of people that actually IT is complex. We need to take a bit of time up front to understand it, to get that repeatability, that predictability, and then if we understand that, we can go faster. Right, and we sit them in. We go through the modeling, we go through the data flows. We'd understand the profiling up the front, bit of incubation around understanding what challenges are, asking critical questions to various stakeholders who've never really been asked these questions before. Shock horror, architects being asked how the architecture is going to work, rather than just producing a kind of a diagram and chucking it over the fence. And it really drove out some fundamental conversations, which really reinforced the good behaviors that we were putting into these teams. And we'd go and prove a point on a smaller piece of work, right? And then we go and send these individuals out to various teams to go and ask those critical questions of the other teams, right? And they are very fundamental questions that can be quickly answered with a yes, I know the answer to this, or actually no, we don't. Right, and I think then you're into the incentives, right? And I'll come back to one of the points I made earlier on around, testing equals test automation, and therefore test automation figures are an incentive that lots of test teams are given, right? What is your automation percentage? It's the wrong measure, right? You're going to drive incentives to just bump up that automation figure, and quality gets put by the side, right? And it's crazy. Right. And you need to be careful about what incentives you're actually giving to people. Actually, the tools you've mentioned, they give the ability to make the subjective questions objective. Right. We can put a measurement number against a model, for example. We can understand complexity against the model, and so we're creating the right incentives to the people on the ground, but also we're holding product owners maybe to account in making the right decisions based on the right underlying information, the right risks. It becomes a much more team-centric conversation about what does quality actually mean, right? Rather than the subjective. And I think Chris mentioned, there was one person in that room who had a vote on whether it went, and that was probably largely incentivized by whether that person was hitting a date to get their bonus, no doubt, right? Rather than actually what is the quality of this thing we're doing here and now. but also what mess are we building up for the future, right? And I think there's a very fundamental step back around what are the measures we've got, and do they actually drive the right incentives to create sustainable change, I think is the kind of the underlying point, right? We want to make change, but inevitably we want to make change faster, but we want to repeatedly make change faster. And I think that's often missed, right? We're just trying to make change faster today in a lot of the feature factory models we see.
Chris, Rich, a pleasure as ever to chat. I think we're going to have another one on this. Chris is a font of information and tells a good tale. All right, cheers, gentlemen. All the best.
Good day.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Why Didn't You Test That podcast. To continue the conversation, head over to curiositysoftware.ie and don't forget to subscribe for more episodes.